Ladies and gentlemen, we're back again. It's another episode of Tej Talks. Today I've got someone truly inspirational. She is not only an inspirational writer, she is one of the most creative individuals I've come to know. And I wanted her to share her message with you today because I know there are some of you who are sitting in class or watching this today who are feeling anxious, who are feeling a little bit down, who are feeling often that, why am I here? Why am I in school? What is school going to give me? So I've brought her here today to talk to you so that you can feel inspired like I have done to be nothing other than you. I hope you enjoy this. It's Fatima Bhutto. How are you?
Good,
Thank you so much for being here today. Definitely an honor for me personally, let alone all of the hundreds and thousands of pupils who hopefully will see this. Fatima, as we're sitting here today, we're in the midst of a very interesting climate in the world. It seems as though we're losing a grip on climate change. It seems that we're losing a grip on the overall political landscape. So I start to think, what are the only consistencies that we have in this world? And one of them is education. It's one of the things we can control. One of the things that we believe to be a birthright and a source of inspiration and hope. We work with so many disadvantaged students. We work with students who have come from really tough backgrounds, who are sitting in our classrooms today feeling like school isn't right for them. What do the politicians, what does the system need to know today to be able to help these students who necessarily aren't academically gifted, but within them have this creative genius? Could you share some of your thoughts and how they can receive this inspiration that you seem to have within you to be able to write the way you do?
I don't think there's anything that we could call academically gifted to begin with. And I think that's one of the big errors that the education system does, is it says that this child is clever and this one is not. And how do we gauge intelligence? I just don't think it can be gauged by scores or grades or anything except curiosity. And my experience is that any child who is curious is clever. And it doesn't matter what you're curious about, just the act of questioning, of wanting to investigate, of observing, for me, qualifies intelligence. And if schools were able to recognize and celebrate that, I think there'd be a lot fewer children feeling adrift in these large systems. You know, in today's world, you have, as you said, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of turbulence everywhere. And somehow we're told to be successful, you have to be viewed as working down a path. I think that's a sort of confining, suffocating way to raise a generation to cope with the chaos around us. And to cope with chaos, we have to be curious and we have to be creative and we have to be free to think of it in new ways. You know, how do you approach climate change? There's not just one way, there's 100 ways.
Which backs up the point that creativity is critical.
Absolutely, and creativity, you can't judge creativity on a test. There's not like 5 things that make you creative and 3 that don't.
No, it's not binary.
Exactly. Creativity is not linear. Curiosity is not linear. And it's those things really that need to be encouraged in schools.
Why do you think our system has almost a fear towards teaching creativity and accepting creativity as a valid gift, talent, versus being good at math or being good at English? It seems to be more of a superior quality for a 15-year-old sitting in school today than exercising a piece of creative writing or exercising creative questioning. How do you think we've gotten to this place?
Well, it's because there's no metric for creativity. You know, 2 + 2 is 4. If you say 3, you're stupid. You can't do that with creativity. You can't say anything is a bad idea. There's no such thing as a bad idea. All ideas are valid, all ideas are dynamic, and all ideas should be entertained. And I think the schools are nervous because that's so disruptive, isn't it? To say all ideas are great and all ideas should be entertained. And it takes really invested open teachers to be able to do that.
Yes.
And I don't know that any of our systems, whether they're education systems or business systems, encourage pathways for those kind of people.
Did you have any open and creative teachers when you were in school?
I did. I was very lucky. I was very lucky to have a father
Yes.
who allowed me to
Yes.
think and question and be curious
Yes.
at home.
Yes.
And I was also very lucky to have that met at school, because had I gone to school with this open idea of being allowed to ask questions and found myself shut down, I would have hit a wall. But I was lucky to have teachers that allowed me to question and never said, that's not anything you need to think about.
You've mentioned that you had a father who manifested your creativity, took your uniqueness and almost cherished that, nourished that, so it became a strength as opposed to any form of limitation. We've got pupils today in our schools who haven't had that fortune, haven't had that, or don't have that parental leadership. What are 3 lessons that you learned from your father that you could share with the pupils we have around the world that they could take away from that?
Well, I think, of course, as you said, there are many people who don't have the fortune of having a supportive parent or supportive teachers. But what I felt growing up, especially as a young girl, is that you really only need one person. It could be a parent, that's lucky if it is. It could be a teacher, it could be a mentor, it could be anyone. But so long as you have one person that asks you questions and that encourages you to ask questions back. At a young age, I think especially for girls, but of course for both girls and boys, that's like a light being switched on in a room.
Yes.
It completely changes how you view the world.
Completely.
It's a fundamental shift in your perspective.
Completely.
Anyone that allows you to observe, I think, is a gift.
Yes.
And
Observe what specifically?
everything.
Everything.
Everything. That allows you to say, I'm curious today about the weather. Why is it like this? Or I'm curious about a book. Or I saw something on the news. This is what I think about it. Is a gift, because in life, as we see, there are many, many people present at every turn to shut you down and say, no, we're not talking about that. Or no, nobody asked you. Or that's not really a question for you.
Completely.
All you need is one. And I think when you find that one person,
Yeah.
the other thing that I learned as a young person was you need to do that for other people.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky to have that and you see how much it enriches you, then it's your responsibility to do that for younger siblings, friends, people you encounter. And to be a space where questions can move.
Yes.
And where ideas can move.
Yes.
So paying it forward, I suppose,
Totally.
in one sense, but also just being present and available to do that with other people.
Did you ever used to sit in class and be afraid to ask a question because of fear of what the other people in the class, your colleagues and peers would think of you, or the teacher's going to react and say, like, because I found, especially when I was in school, my God, the fear, it was like a phobia.
Yeah.
But what about that kid today who's sitting in class who thinks they know, but just finds it so hard to put their hand up out of fear of humiliation or a feeling of worthlessness? What can we say to that pupil?
I had that as a child because I was obviously always interested in writing and history and literature, but I was petrified of math.
Especially in creatives.
I was petrified of math. I didn't understand it, and the way it was taught to me was, this is obvious. If you don't get it, there's something wrong with you.
Seriously.
Until today, I panic when I'm faced with numbers because I think
Join the club.
there's only one way to do it. I don't know the way. I must be wrong.
Panic.
And I really wish I had somebody that said there's no wrong question. And I think that's the thing. There's no such thing as a bad idea. There's no such thing as a bad question. And anyone that tells a young person that their question is incorrect or badly formed, they're wrong. I think knowing that would have been a relief for me as a young child. And I think that anyone who deals with ideas, as especially young people do, because they're curious about everything, should know, I wish they would know, that the only way things flow is by questioning. And that when you ask a question, It's not stupid, it's not unformed. It's a part of things moving and traveling and changing. And if you don't do it, that's the loss.
So if you could wrap that all up in one piece of advice for that child sitting in that classroom today watching this,
yeah, I would say...
What's the silver bullet? What do they need to know?
The silver bullet is that things change with their involvement.
Right.
Always for the better. Always for the better. Yeah. I think creativity is a huge part, but I think the other part is, practice, engaging, always asking questions. You'll never have all the answers. And if you never have all the answers, then it means you always have to be searching, doesn't it? And you always have to be checking.
Completely.
And so, yes, you do need to be creative, but without asking questions.
So not to be fear of getting involved, not to be fearful of getting
involved. No, get involved. You have to get involved. And that teacher that tells you you're wrong and your idea isn't important, that's an important thing to go through.
It's that feel the fear and do it anyway. Always.
Well, yeah, and also it betrays, what it does is it shows you how wrong the teacher is, not you. You know, it's something that I think everyone's experienced, as you said. And it may not be in all schools, but it's pretty common. But I think having someone tell you no actually shouldn't stop you. No. It's a sign of how much more you have to keep going.
So moving on from that, how do we create a resilient pupil when their environment hinders resilience from manifesting in the first place? Number two, they've come from difficult backgrounds. And number three, they put their hand up to ask the question, they get it wrong, and all of a sudden it's back down.
Well, I think the most important thing to say is that there is no border.
From the pupil's perspective.
From the pupil's perspective.
Forget everyone else. What does that pupil need to know?
They need to know that there is no boundary for education.
Right.
So education doesn't have a border, and it doesn't have limits. Yes. So when you go and you watch a movie, that's part of your education. Totally. When you sit on a train and you look out the window, that's part of your education. When you talk to a stranger that comes from another part of the world that you do, that has a different experience than you do, that's part of your education. When you travel, when you read, when you listen to music, all of that is education.
So expanding the horizon of what education actually is, because I totally agree with you. Often they're sold this concept of education as getting A stars and level 8s and at the end of your GCSEs or your A or your AS levels. It's that envelope, and this is me, this is my education, this is what I've got.
No. I think students should know that their education is defined by the world around them and by their encounters with it. So any encounter qualifies. It's not that what happens from 8 in the morning to 2 p.m. in this location asked by that person is education and nothing else is. I just don't think that's fair. And I think today, when we look at technology, when we look at artificial intelligence and virtual reality and video games, all of that is part of it. I mean, all of that is experiencing something new, engaging in something new, questioning something new. And I think it counts. I mean, obviously I'm not saying go and play FIFA for 7 hours a day and that's education.
No, of course not.
But
your point is you can learn from everything.
You learn from everything.
It's not necessarily learning in the classroom.
You learn everywhere. As long as you're open and curious, then everything is an education. And you set the agenda, really. And you set it by being open. You set it by talking, listening, reading, writing. And nobody has the power to tell you what's correct or not correct there.
What advice could you give for especially the young students, the really young youth of today who are often I see who are caught up in this spiral of am I good enough? Will I fit in? How do I look? Is this good enough? Am I turning up and being good enough? And while that question is being asked, it almost hinders good quality questions. What can we do about that?
I think if we look at social media, we should separate two things. Is that the social media that encourages you to focus on the self, right? What am I wearing? How do I look? Where am I? I think we can separate as not really very useful.
Yes, totally agree.
The way in which social media can be useful is when it allows you to encounter others. So obviously by that I mean if you're going on Twitter and you're following, a writer in Peru and you're learning a little bit about something happening in Peru or something happens in the news in the morning and you go online and look that up. I think that's where social media can be really positive and really helpful and can link people to collaborate on ideas, to ask questions, to converse. And that should be encouraged. But obviously the social media that focuses on the self, I think unfortunately that's not going to be helpful to anyone at any age. And I know it's fun and it's sort of distracting, but the thing I always wonder is, how am I connecting to the world? And I don't think you are connecting to the world if it's about showing off or competing.
So how could they use it more effectively?
So if you're interested in design, for example, and you go on your Instagram and you look up graphic designers, you know, and these are people who maybe live near you, who you can write to, who you can ask for tips or experience. I think social media can be a really positive place for people to chat. In that sense, yes. Obviously, it's different if your curiosity is, let's say, competitive rather than collaborative. And in that case, I just feel it's a brick wall.
Yes, completely.
You know, you're hitting your head against it.
Currently on the spectrum, where do you think the youth of today are using social media? Do you feel they could be doing a lot more with it? Do you feel often it's used as an avenue for self-comparison, for almost bridging more insecurity than creativity and security?
I think, unfortunately, with things like Facebook or Instagram, it is used that way because it's all about one-upmanship or, you know, missing out on things. And that's sad, really. But I think that's not necessarily the child's fault. Because if you don't give a child things to be curious about and you don't show them that the world is filled with things to be curious about, they're adrift.
If I had a choice, you change the system and you change schools so that you do leave. Almost, I know this is going to sound a bit weird, but you'd leave as the whole package. You'd leave radiating with confidence. You'd believe in yourself. You'd feel unstoppable. You'd be fearless. I mean, surely that's the goal of education. But that's not what's happening. So,
well, do you know what I do? Okay, so like anyone else, I like Instagram. I will never, ever put a picture of myself up on Instagram. Because I'm not interested in putting myself up for other people to discuss. What I will use on Instagram is if I'm reading a book that I really like, I'll take a picture of it and say, oh, you have to see this book. If I've watched a film that I think is really shocking or curious, I will say, oh, this is a great film. If I've traveled to a new country and I've seen something new that I didn't expect, I will take a picture of that and say, this is this place. I didn't know this existed here. And in that case, the only way that I can engage in social media is through ideas.
But you're harnessing it for creativity, you're harnessing it to share your story.
And to support others, really, I think. To say that, you know, this is a friend who works in this field, they're doing a really good thing, you should know their group. Or this is a book that I think somebody worked really hard on and I really enjoyed and I think other people would enjoy it too. And I think in that case, you can't but be supportive, you can't but be collaborative because what you're choosing to engage with each other on is that.
Totally.
Now, of course, I know that's harder if you're probably 15 or 16 years old.
But surely that should be taught in schools.
Yeah, of course. I think that's something that if one learnt at an early age, you would have the confidence to resist all the competition. You know, I understand it's hard for young girls, especially because they're always told they have to look a certain way and they have to be a certain way. And the truth is, girls don't have to be anything. And girls should always do what makes them comfortable. And I think young girls especially know what's uncomfortable and they feel what's uncomfortable. And if you're putting up pictures of books on Instagram, you might not get like 1,000 retweets or 1,000 reposts. But you will help someone else who likes books. And you will maybe meet friends who say, oh, I really like that. Have you read this? And I think we have to have the space and the comfort to create our own conversations.
Totally agree with you.
And I wish people would do that. I mean, that's what I get out of social media. Is a great article, a great book, something new about a place I didn't think of before. And I think the internet is a really positive place for discovering new ideas.
Of course it is. It can be a very, very positive catalyst to everything we've been talking about. Do you believe the time for teaching world affairs, the time for teaching politics, how countries are structured, the political boundaries should be as early as in primary school, as opposed to only having that available when you're 19, 20, 21.
Oh, of course.
74% of the population today is still living on less than $10 a day. Who's going to solve that problem? Surely it's the kids in school today that need that creative spark, that creative genius to be able to do that. What needs to change in the system?
Partly it's what you said. It's that today, unlike maybe when I was in school a while ago, today when you're sitting in a classroom in Luton, you're not restricted to Luton. There's somebody in that classroom that comes from another continent, that comes from another experience, that's had to travel through great difficulty to get there, that comes from another religion, another ethnic background. And so, of course, schools have to adapt to include everybody and to have discussions of the world. And I think young people are curious about that. I think they want to know more of the world. We have all the tools at our fingertips. We have all the internet, all the search capabilities to know more. And I think education, as you said, of course, has to talk about politics. Politics is in everything. Politics is everywhere. Politics is why somebody lives in a place and why they don't live in their home country. And I think that is changing. I think we're seeing it a lot with migration, with globalization, of course, with the refugee crisis.
Changing rapidly. Year on year.
I was just in a refugee camp in Lebanon that's only been operating for the last 3 years, really, and has a lot of young Syrian children coming in who've left their homes, who've left their schools, who've left everything behind. And they're in a new town, a new village, a new country. And what I thought was really interesting is that in this small school, you had volunteers from Portugal, you had somebody teaching French, you had somebody else teaching English. And of course, even in a village in northern Lebanon, the conversation cannot only be about Lebanon. It has to be about Syria, Portugal, France, England, because that's the way the world is now.
Extending beyond that one math class, important, definitely relevant.
Of course, we
But
don't have boundaries anymore.
There's a big world out there, and unless we're teaching our kids about how to adapt and thrive in that world,
Absolutely.
you're going to be in this cycle. But surely it adds to the discussion that we had earlier that unless we move on to a more collaborative model, I often think it's just horrific how someone can sit there and win £50 million in the lottery, and yet there are people who can't afford to eat. There are people with no homes. People have 5 homes, and there are people who don't even have a bedroom. The one thing that can change that is education. As
I was saying, for me, really the most important thing is that there are no borders to education. There's no time limit, there's no frame, and there's no restriction.
Of course.
I mean, you mentioned the lottery. I think it's even more ridiculous that like people playing sports essentially earn in a week what some countries can't afford to give people to help.
Ever.
You know, in the event of a disaster, or, you know, you see these hurricanes and these floods, and then you find that a football player earns triple what's needed to care for an entire population in 7 days. In 7 days. But I think, I really do think that the important thing for young people to know is that just as there are no borders to how we learn, there's no border to what makes them intelligent or creative. You know, learning about history is not just about a chapter in a school book, it's about watching the news.
But just emphasising what you just said there, that there are no borders to the level of creativity that one can have. How can one believe that to be true about themselves? What do they need to shift in their thought process? Because obviously you've done it, right? We're coming from a position of experience. We've had that additional 10, 15 years of learning. How do we package that up and deliver that to a 15, 16-year-old today who feels that life is limiting, that I'm being compared to everyone, that school isn't right for me?
You encourage them, I think, to break walls. I wrote a book of poetry when I was quite young, and maybe 10 years after the book had come out, some of those poems had been included in a textbook in Pakistan. And I was asked to go to a few schools and talk to children from 3rd grade to 6th grade about poetry. And when I went into all those rooms to talk to young kids, And again, these are kids who are quite lucky to be in quite small classrooms, 30 people a class. They had, in theory, time and attention and space. And I came in and said, I'm here to talk to you about poetry. A lot of kids, a lot of boys also were like, poetry's stupid.
Right.
And I said, okay, sure. Of course you would think poetry's stupid if they're making you read Shakespearean sonnets and you're 12 years old. And then I would ask these kids, I'd say, well, who listens to rap? And all the boys' hands would go up and I'd say, well, you're listening to poetry.
Yeah.
So thank you. Poetry is not stupid.
Yeah, exactly.
And there would be a moment of shock, and they would always say, is Jay-Z poetry? And I'd say, of course he is.
Exactly.
Is Tupac poetry? Of course he is.
Of course.
So you break walls. Yeah. Poetry doesn't mean one thing.
Yes.
Poetry means a number of things. Poetry means spoken word. It means Tupac. It means Eminem. It means the experience of a young person in a difficult place.
Yes.
It means writing in your diary. Yes. It means fighting with a friend. All that's poetry,
yes.
And the moment we would say that in the class, suddenly boys who were like sniggering and bored at the idea of poetry wanted to write it.
They get it.
Because they would think, can I write poetry? And I'd say, I don't know, can you sing? And they'd say, yeah, I can sing. Well, that's poetry. So you have to, I think a lot of education is about breaking walls,
Totally.
I wish my math teacher had told me that math was not just algebra, but math was raising money for a flood.
Of course.
Helping somebody produce a movie that they want to put up on YouTube.
Awesome.
If I knew that's what math was, I'd have been good at math.
Awesome. Absolutely.
Right?
Completely agree with you.
And I think the same thing, history is not just about the Battle of Hastings.
Exactly.
Or, World War I. History is about going to a protest. It's about going to a speaker's corner. It's about going down to your mosque or your church. Or that's what history is.
And that's the shift we need to bring.
Yeah. So that's it, breaking walls, What's science? Science isn't just about beakers. Science is video games. Science is virtual reality. All of that is science. Your Twitter is science, frankly. And if you can break the barriers people have about those topics, then you can also break their insecurity about being involved in them.
Perfectly put. Absolutely perfectly put. What are 3 lessons you've learned in your life to date?
Well, that's a huge one, is that anytime someone puts a wall in front of you, you should break it.
Awesome. Completely agree.
Because what you find beyond the wall is far more interesting than the wall.
Exactly. And often the wall is put up by someone who
doesn't want you
to
go looking.
Exactly.
But break it and go looking. Maybe you find nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe you find something fascinating, but break it.
Yeah.
I think that's one. I think the second is that, of course, when we're talking about breaking and questioning, it's always to do so with compassion and respect. So don't break walls just because you like to break things. Yeah. Break them because you want to know more, because you want to see more, because you want to be involved in more. In that case, it will always be respectful, and it will always take you much further than you want to go.
Absolutely.
Or you think you can go.
Absolutely.
And the third thing, there's so many, but the third thing I would say is that if there's something you like, whether it's maths or poetry or writing or filmmaking or photography, being curious about it is not just enough.
Yeah.
You have to work incredibly hard.
Yes.
So if you like poetry, it's not enough just to say, I like poetry.
And that's it.
Read as much poetry as you can find. Write as much poetry as you can find. And never be afraid of criticism. Because, I think...
But how can you not be afraid of criticism?
You can't, because you get better the more you work at something.
So what do you need to believe about yourself?
That you will always get better the more you question your limits and your capabilities. So if you are 13 years old...
That needs to be plastered on every school.
I think so.
Completely.
I think so. If you're 13 years old and you love making films on your phone, and if at 13 you think you're the best filmmaker that's ever existed, you're not going to go very far. But if you're 13 years old, you love making films, and you're going to learn from watching films, you're going to learn from trying new things, you're going to learn from showing your films to people and having them give you good advice, then you will actually, in 10, 20, 30 years' time, be an incredible filmmaker.
Absolutely.
And there's the adage that anything that you do for 1,000 hours will make you a master at it. I think it's true.
Yeah.
I'm a writer. And I always say that I don't think I'm a writer, I think I'm a rewriter.
Yeah.
Because the first draft of anything I write is just not going to be great.
Yeah.
It's not even going to be good, actually. But the 20th draft of something I've written is going to be interesting.
That's the one.
It's going to be interesting. And obviously, as you get involved in questioning, you learn what's good advice, who is a good questioner for you, what kind of people should you be talking to. But you should never stop trying to be better. Yeah. And if you are not afraid of criticism, if you're not afraid of trying harder or longer or more, then I think the world can't stop you. Nobody can stop you.
That's a rule book for life, as you said. Break down walls, be in love with what's either behind the wall or the journey of breaking that wall down. Yeah. And then I love the last one. You can't sacrifice on just having an epic work ethic. Yeah. And I think one of the final messages as we conclude is for the students that often, while there are issues with the system, while there are issues with maybe your teacher, but as you've so rightly put, you've got to take back control. It's down to you at the end of the day, right? You've got to put that work in.
Creativity is important, but creativity has to be harnessed and disciplined.
Of course.
So, if you take beautiful photographs at 15, imagine what you can do at 35 if you keep trying to be better.
With your 1,000 hours.
With your 1,000 hours. I really think it's true. That's, they call it tradecraft, right? If you constantly challenge yourself, it's impossible for you not to be better. If you just congratulate yourself, you'll get stuck. Yes. And you will be a 35-year-old photographer taking 15-year-old pictures.
Well, I just want to mention that your last point there about congratulating yourself. I think that's also a key thing that one needs to learn to do, self-praise.
Oh, sure.
Very early on.
Sure.
Why don't we have classes on self-praise?
Well, I think that's trickier because I think if you do too much self-praise, you won't work as hard. And so the balance has to be correct. So if you're not afraid of criticism and you're not afraid of hard work, then self-praise is no problem.
Yeah, sure.
Then you should say, well, I think I've done a really good job and I'm really pleased with what I've discovered today. But I know there's more to discover tomorrow. And I know there's more to do tomorrow. And I mean, just to go back to young people that I've encountered in the field of writing, because that's what I do.
Yes.
The kid who's written something and enjoyed it, that's half the battle.
Yes.
Because you've already found something you want to spend your time on.
Yes.
But the kid who says, I really had fun doing that story, do you think I could do it another way? Yeah. That kid has the second part of the battle.
Got it.
Because he's ready to keep trying the new.
Take that step.
And trying it, to do different, to do better, to do bigger. And I think when you do that, then of course you need to praise yourself. And of course you need to be proud of the hours you're putting in. But you got to have the hours.
You got to have the hours, right? What advice could you give to schools to start having more creative writing, more poetry classes?
The thing to encourage is to allow people to find their own area of interest. So, art is no longer about drawing a bowl of fruit or having perfect dimensions. Art is graffiti.
Can be anything.
Art is filmmaking. Art is anything. And what you want to be able to do in schools is to say that.
Yes.
That, of course, in school, their job is to teach you the fundamentals.
Yes.
So you have to draw a bowl of fruit, sure.
Yeah.
But
you've got to do your maths, you've got to learn your science.
You've got to learn your maths, exactly.
But we know that.
But I think
that's
once you give us the fundamentals, I think it would be great. I mean, I would have loved it if it happened to me in school.
Yeah.
If once they taught me what algebra is, they then expanded where algebra can be used. And where you can where you can apply it, where you can bend it and twist it and change it and adapt it.
Perfect.
And I think that you do with every single subject, with language, with,
completely.
Completely. If they taught language by telling you that you might be able to travel to those countries, how much more fun would it be?
Different.
Completely. It wouldn't just be about grammar and conjugations and verbs. It would be about seeing the world.
Yeah, absolutely. My final two questions, if I may. Sure. If the angels from the heavens came down and granted you three things you'd like to eradicate from the world today, what would they be?
Well, I mean, there's so much that one would like to eradicate. I mean, I think what I've always been especially interested in is this idea of injustice. And this idea of what it means to suffer injustice. It's a scale that applies to everyone, everywhere.
Totally.
And I think part of the difficulty is that to get justice, sometimes it involves doing injustice to someone else. If I had a magic wand, what I would love to be able to do is to tell people that they're all connected. If you're connected to everybody, how can you hurt anyone? If you see yourself as connected to your neighbor, to the person who lives across the world from you, to the migrant, to the refugee, to your school teacher, you could never do harm to them. You just couldn't. It would be like doing harm to yourself.
Of course.
So more than taking away anything, I think the message that I wish was there was everyone is connected. Everything is connected. That's the first one. I think that would solve so much. It would solve like cruelty to each other, inequality, cruelty to animals, it would just remove. Another thing that I think would be great to do is to let people know that growth, their own growth, relies on the growth of others at a young age. I think schools that involve young people in community work early.
That's a big message.
Is huge as well.
Big message.
Because then the thing is not how do I get rich quick or how do I change the world. You know, changing the world I think is a kind of icky idea. Because I think what you want to be able to do is to make things better. And to make things better you have to work with other people. So you don't get to be a world changer. You get to be a collaborator, you get to be a listener, you get to be, you know, somebody that encounters and engages with others. That would be good too. And the third thing, I mean, again, these are more things I wish were there rather than things I want to take out, is I wish that young people could be told what we said earlier, that there's no border to the possibility they have of engaging in the world. There's no border to intelligence. There's no border to what is considered special or significant or important, and that everyone has a role to play. It's just a question of finding out where your role is.
Inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you.